How's it going, everybody? This is Coughlin, and welcome back to the Barely There podcast. We are back to cover everything surrounding your Chicago Bears. As always, I am joined by the Swami of Salami, the Ayatollah of Capicola, Lucas Perfetti. Lucas, explain to the folks at home how you're doing on this fine evening.
Doing well. I just joined a new fantasy league, so that's fun. It's kind of like a weird 18-team best ball, like gauntlet survivor almost. But yeah, other than that, pretty decent. Just ready to talk about the Bears.
18 teams, holy shit.
It's weird, yeah. It's just, I don't want to divulge too much, and because it is a Bears podcast, but it's 18 teams, and after every week, whoever's got the lowest point gets eliminated, and then you have like a fob of salary, right? Like imaginary Monopoly money, but you bid on the players that like they drafted from their team. So teams get like really stacked quickly, from what I understand, but it is brutal to start. Like you got to make it through the gauntlet those first few weeks.
Yeah, that sounds pretty wild. You're gonna have to tell me a little bit more about that when we are off camera. But love to hear it, buddy. I am actually I'm just now being the commissioner of my first work fantasy football league and getting that together. So some bragging rights at the office. Definitely got a lot of money that I'm gonna steal from a lot of my coworkers, which is gonna be pretty fucking cool. But anyway, we have quite a bit to cover in this episode. Before we jump into it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to follow us at Barely There Pod on Twitter to stay up to date on everything related to the show. So, the last time we would have been on this podcast, Lucas, it would have been post draft. Obviously, we did our live draft show as we do every year. Definitely something that's a ton of fun. You know, I always say it, but once again, thanks to everybody who joined on that, who supported it. It's always a great time. I'm pretty sure after that we had an episode where we kind of discussed kind of the dead zone of the offseason as we were kind of getting into some of the free agent signings and everything like that. We had obviously signed our blue chip guys like the Nate Davises of the world and whatnot. But obviously we have to discuss the big signing because it felt like coming out of the offseason, there was one thing that was kind of missing. It was kind of the elephant in the room. It was what was Ryan Poles going to do to address the pass rushing room. And he didn't do it in the draft. He didn't do it in a trade. I think a lot of people were pretty up on the Chase Young potential. Obviously, Jadeveon Clowney was a name that was tossed around as well. But the Chicago Bears end up signing Yannick Ngakoue to a 1-year, $10.5 million contract to really kind of fill that role as the top pass rusher on the team. Now I have my thoughts on it, but Lucas, I'll let you take the floor. How are you feeling about this signing? Is this an absolute knock it out of the park signing for Poles? And what do you think Ngakoue's impact can be from day one?
Yeah, I mean, that's who I wanted. Even coming into the offseason, I would have been okay with them paying him quite a bit more for a few years, right? Coming like into the offseason when the first wave of free agents was happening. So, I think he's going to give you what at least Bears fans want the most, and that's that situational pass rusher that's going to be able to affect the passer. Something that we didn't have last year at all, right? Like there was not one dude. Jaquan Briscoe was probably our best pass rusher last year. No fucking joke. So, we needed someone like that. I also am kind of surprised that they signed him after they waited that long because the market settles, quite a bit after the first, second, and third waves, and then the draft happens, and then you get some priority guys that maybe haven't been signed yet. The even still aren't signed, like the Dalvin Cooks of the world and stuff like that. But I was very surprised that we ended up going with Yannick Ngakoue because the deeper we got into the offseason, I was pretty much thinking like, hey, we drafted 2 tackles. We signed a guy that a lot of people in Walker were profiling as a pass rushing 3 technique or an interior pass rusher on passing downs. And in an Eberflus offense, defense, it typically didn't have like stacked pass rushers. A lot of their best players were on the interior. So I was like, okay, they invested a ton in the interior with Dexter Pickens. They even signed the dude from the Raiders, right? And they had Justin Jones still. So I'm like, okay, that's their way of addressing the running and the rushing problems is through the interior. But it was a nice little chip, a nice little piece to see Yannick Ngakoue come in well before the Michael Schofield-esque signing last year and Riley Reif, right? Like fucking 4 days before the season started. Like this was in good time for him to get there, work out with the team, kind of get adjusted. And he's got some familiarity with the system. So the fact that it was no strings attached, like I was very, very opposed to the idea of trading for Chase Young simply because he was on his last year of his deal and they didn't have the 5th-year option was already declined, right? Like I was not trying to invest any legitimate capital in a guy that you only have 1 year of contract for. So, and he's had his injury concerns. He had a great first year, but he's more of a, I don't want to say this, Chase Young could be that good, right? He was on that trajectory, but he was more of like a Mac type in a sense where he wasn't going to get the pass rushing numbers, but just really all around good. But with his injuries and him not getting as fast of a start as you'd like, I was opposed to it, right? So I'm happy with the Ngakoue signing. I'm pretty pumped about it.
Yeah, and I think even just touching quick on the Chase Young thing, like he has all the potential in the world. I don't think anybody can really deny that. But if we would have given any sort of significant draft capital up for that, especially after the Claypool trade, like that's putting a lot of eggs in a basket that just hasn't come to roost. You know what I mean? And Chase Young, he is a guy who was obviously one of the best players in college football, showed a lot of flashes of that in the NFL, but like you said, can't stay healthy. And if you're going to be that type of player, similar to that kind of Khalil Mack build as you brought up, you have to be great at it. You have to be great at everything. Like you really cannot have flaws in your game. You know what I mean? You don't necessarily have to be elite at any one thing, but you have to be great at a little bit of everything. And he's shown some flaws in his game, and it's a great reclamation project for a team that wants to take a chance on that. I think Washington's just going to stand pat and keep him around, but it was an interesting idea. I just would have hated it if we would have given up anything significant for it because it's just too much of a risk for me. But Yannick Ngakoue, he is a guy that honestly, like early on in the process, I didn't necessarily want us to mess around with, and it was for a dumb reason, and I can fully admit that. It was for the reason that he had bounced around a little bit. He for whatever reason could not find a way to stick with a football team. He left Jacksonville on unceremonious terms. I mean, that'll happen when Jacksonville has been kind of the dumpster fire it's been in the last few years. And then he goes to Minnesota in a big move and doesn't end up doing anything of significance really there. Same thing with Baltimore. And then he goes to the Raiders, kind of really pops off and has that type of season that we expected out of him. And then doesn't end up getting a second contract there, and then goes to Indy, does kind of the same type of production in 15 games. It was a situation where it's like, why can't this guy stay with one team? Because the talent is obvious with this guy. You know what I mean? But I think signing him to this 1-year deal, kind of similar to what other teams have done with him, kind of taking that flyer on him, kind of, I like calling these guys mercenaries because that's essentially what they are.
Yeah.
Dude, they're a sack man for hire, and there's nothing wrong with that. Guys make a lot of money off that type of career. But I just wonder what that is. You know what I mean? I hope there's nothing to that because I think the talent on the field and the guy you're getting in the Ngakoue is dynamite. And
I wonder now that you say that about the Raiders, it's like, I wonder if fucking Crosby helped that situation a lot, like him get more on track. But at the end of the day, it's a $10.5 million contract. Sure, you can roll that money over into next year's cap, but you already have the most cap space for next year. Doesn't hurt you in terms of draft capital or, if you cut them, there's no dead money, right? Like we've been dealing with so much of that shit that it's like, it's a very painless move for
it's a low risk, high reward move.
Like low risk, high reward. And he's pretty much the Don Reddy. You ever seen that movie, The Goods, Don Reddy, The Goods with Jeremy Piven, where they like just go sling cars? It's essentially that, but for
I don't think I've caught that one.
Look it up. It's actually so stupid. It's got a couple of the one chick that's in the chick from Step Brothers that pisses in the urinal, and like got a couple other good characters. So
I'll have to keep an eye out for it because I really like Jeremy Piven. He was actually just up in Madison last weekend, I want to say. Yeah. Or no, weekend before. But yeah, no, I more or less with Ngakoue, dude. I think it's a great move. I think it's desperately needed. It kind of puts everybody kind of on notice in that pass rushing room as well, because like we have that legitimate proven guy in the pass rushing room where we can't really get by with this whole like, oh, well, we have no one around them, so we can't really do anything. If we struggle, it's because we're young and all that type of stuff. This lights a little bit of fire in everyone's ass, and I think it gives a guy like Justin Jones, who I have to give a little bit of credit for, if for nothing else, just the amount of shit he talks to Packer fans, gives another veteran presence on that front four. And honestly, that's been just desperately needed since both the Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack trades.
Well, and you could tell too, just in general with the defense, there's some juice, right? Like that gave them a little bit more. Like they made a ton of signings on defense, and I mean their secondary is going to be so fucking sick. It's not going to be fair, but you could tell like that signing gave that defense just a bit more juice. It gave the fan base that much more. Why wouldn't it give the team that much more juice, right? It's similar to DJ Moore effect. Like, obviously not as big, but fuck, dude, it's like, okay, like we're going for it now. We're expected to win. We're no longer, like, oh, we're evaluating. No, like we expect you to fucking win now.
Yeah, no, and that's where I got to give Poles a lot of credit, because he did the exact right approach when it came to this defense. He stuck with the guys that proved themselves last year, and he genuinely built around like the kind of the core that we had bubbling on the defensive side of the football. Because obviously, when you look at the team as a whole last year on defense, after the Roquan trade, it wasn't great. There was just absolutely no way to get around that. But Poles actively addressed a lot of these spots outside of the guys who didn't need to be replaced. Jack Sanborn, a guy who belongs on the field. Kyler Gordon, a guy who's proven that he belongs on the field. Jaquan Brisker looks like a potential all-pro safety in the making. Eddie Jackson with a resurgence of a season, which, by the way, my boy Eddie, I just can't get over how fucking good of a season he had.
I hope he stays a Bear now for good. Not unless he plays like 12 years and he goes and signs like 1 year contracts places, but I really hope like he finishes his contract. We don't really need to cut him. I don't know how much longer he's got, but
he was a guy who was coming into last season was seen as a potential character problem, a potential locker room issue, because people thought he would have a hard time taking Matt Eberflus's tough style of coaching, because Eddie was kind of in his own world for the past few years. But if anybody has responded to Eberflus's coaching better, I don't know if you could find someone who has responded to it better than Eddie Jackson. He is a guy who has absolutely embraced it. I think Jalen Johnson deserves a lot of credit as well, because he was a guy who even actively questioned the hits principle early on in the process, and he is a guy who has just been a consummate professional since. And I really think that is you have to pat Matt Eberflus on the back for that. He's a guy who demands respect in the locker room, and with a guy like Eddie Jackson. He played for Nick Saban in college, dude. Like, he's a guy who respects tough leadership. And that's why he got along with Vic Fangio so well, and that's why he played so well in that system. So to see him really thrive last season and hopefully into this season, like I think he's one of the unquestioned leaders on this defense across the board.
100%. I would say he should probably earn a captain patch this year. I would assume, right? Like with the history, and because it's a team vote too. So I would assume he would have some holdovers from last year and shit like that are gonna vote for him over some of the newer guys. But yeah, I would like to see him with a captain's patch, right? Like I think he deserves it. Like you said, and there were no bumps in the road with him. It was like the second the new regime came in, like there was never any questions about him. He was a leader from the start. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate his game, and I'm with you 100%. Hope he has a captain's patch. I'd honestly be stunned at this point if he didn't. But I think this kind of brings up a good point, because we're talking about a lot of the guys on defense and how Poles kind of built this roster out. So the Bears released their first depth chart of the season on the 8th. And I really think there's a lot that's kind of been talked about with this. The two obvious elephants in the room is the fact that Trevis Gibson and Kindle Vildor are being listed as fourth stringers on the current iteration of the depth chart. So, Lucas, I'm going to ask you just right off the bat, how much stock can you put into this first release of the depth chart? Do you think this is a genuine indication of who's going to be on the field this season? Do you think this is an indication of people who should be worried about their jobs? Is this a situation where they're trying to get young guys involved early? I've heard about every theory in the world. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Obviously, I have an opinion on it, but what are your first initial thoughts on the first depth chart of the year for the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, I think it's one of two things, right? I think it's either because like we didn't add so much depth at these spots, right? Like defensive end, I could say we made minimal investment in, especially up to the Ngakoue point. And for cornerback, it's like, yeah, we drafted Stevenson, but That's so great. I don't see the thing, dude. I got locked out. We got to talk about that after. But um yeah, so like both of those guys, to me, it's not like there was so much young talent or like we made these big signings in those spots that's going to push them all the way to fourth, right? You would think like the Ngakoue signing, maybe they prefer Walker to be a starter, so it would bump Travis and Vildor to second string, maybe third string. But to me, it's one of two things: either A, they like came into camp out of shape or did something to fucking get in the doghouse and they have to work their way back up, or they're just straight up getting cut. Like they, because there's no, like, you don't need to see more from them in the preseason. You get a full year to evaluate them. They have a lot, like Poles and Co. have a lot more tape, tape within this system on Gibson and Vildor than they do on any of these new rookies. So, if it was just for if it was just for the purposes of preseason games, like they wouldn't need to make the official depth chart and put these guys fourth to like let you know when they're coming in the game. Like, no, it would be, they would be listed at the appropriate position, and then fucking they just wouldn't go on the field as much or as early, right? If they wanted to get a good look at these young guys. So it's one of those two things, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think this really does have to spark the conversation about, how does Ryan Poles prioritize guys that he's brought onto the roster compared to Ryan Pace holdovers? Which, I do want to preface this by saying that if that is the case, I don't really have a problem with it because I understand wanting to have your guys in the building. And, as much as me and you hoot and hollered last year about Ryan Poles kind of tearing down the foundation of this roster, that seems like the way he wants to roll. And honestly, it's not looking terrible right now. I mean, there's moves here and there that obviously we haven't agreed with, but if it's a situation where, Eberflus wants his guys, maybe Eberflus and Gibson don't gel. Maybe Vildor was a guy that, they saw promise in last year, but now that they had a chance to address the cornerback position, especially with a guy like Tyreek Stevenson, who's going to be very hard to keep off the field, maybe they see him in a little bit of a different light with the talent they currently have in the room now compared to what they had last year. Because I mean, it did kind of seem like Eberflus was battling with scraps last year to a point. You know what I mean?
He was. That was so dog shit.
Yeah, I mean, me and you even
so
discussed
bad,
it.
dude.
I'll say, dude, me and you even discussed it whenever when we went to camp last year, was like, these guys look really good in camp, but like, what are they going to look like when it comes to other guys? Because some of these dudes you just don't see as long-term pieces on a roster. And we almost thought that like Poles was having a mutiny against Eberflus and just kind of being like, "Oh, let's see what you can do." You know what I mean? But like I said, dude, I have to give him a lot of credit for bringing in some of these guys. And the Tyreek Stevenson, we said it on our draft show, that was a dynamite freaking draft pick in that spot. I can't believe he fell that far. That's a guy that could be starting on a lot of freaking teams as the outside corner in year one. So it's going to be really interesting to see what his role is and see where him and Kyler Gordon line up in the first preseason game. I'm really excited to see that. But yeah, I mean, seeing Kindle Vildor that far back in the depth chart, Jalen Jones as well, who was a guy who I think a lot of us were kind of high on last year.
Yeah, get some plays.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, but maybe this is, Eberflus trying to get a fire under these guys' asses too, because, while I understand, Vildor or Gibson being that low on the depth chart, like it's still nice to have that depth that knows your playbook and knows the type of system that you want to run on defense. And honestly, I think it's crazy that Gibson's that far on the depth chart when we've seen what Travis Gibson can be as a situational pass rusher. That was his best season. That's kind of what made him, pop off, if you will. So I really think it's interesting, but Rasheem Green could look great in camp right now. I think Dominique Robinson, I think the jury's still out on him, but it's very obvious that he has the athleticism to be an incredible situational pass rusher. Like he's just a bit, he seems like a big play guy. And I think that guy, Dominique Robinson, could be the reason that Travis Gibson's fallen so far on the depth chart compared to some of these other names.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so here's the thing, right? If it was just a Ryan Pace regime thing, we had the number one pick. We probably could have moved on from Justin Fields if he really just wanted to not have anything to do with Pace, which would be stupid. But, there's two major guys that were four really, but three of them were for the Pace regime that were up for contract extension. And we saw Cole Kmet get like a very good contract, right? Something we also didn't cover in the past couple, 6 weeks or so, but Cole Kmet got a very good extension, right? Like he's getting top, I want to say top 6 or something like that money at the tight end position. And that's a Pace project. And like Ryan Poles said afterwards, straight up, hey, he embodied everything we want from the Chicago Bears. Like he, character wise, performance wise, we think he's still ascending, like young player, good, right? So, and Cole Kmet's really young, so that could be part of it, right? Like he doesn't want to extend guys that are maybe a little bit older. Maybe they were seniors coming out of college or whatever, right? And they're approaching things, so they just want to get young. But you know what I mean? Like Jalen Johnson, we'll see what happens with him. That's the other biggest name, him and Mooney, I would say. But like, I don't know if those deals get done, but he also offered David Montgomery the same money that Detroit offered him. So it's not like he didn't want to retain him too. And that's a guy that he spoke really had high praises about throughout the year as well. So, as much as I want to say Poles is a fat slob that's just got peanut brittle all over his nuts, like I think he's smart enough to know, like when you have a really good player, you can't just let him hit the open market. He might be a little bit stern in his values and what he's going to be willing to pay a certain guy and not go above that number, which is probably good in the long run. But like, it's hard for me to say that after him giving that Cole Kmet extension and investing so much in Justin Fields.
Yeah, couple things. So I do think Poles maybe has learned a little bit from year one. And I think, he did learn a lot from the Roquan situation about how that negotiation went. And I think he's kind of adjusted how he wants to handle these types of contract negotiations. Like to
He's
instead of like
saying that on Waddle and Sylvie too.
What's that?
He did say that, like on Waddle and Sylvie, he went as far as saying that like he's approaching it much differently after last year.
Well, and that's the type of growth that I like to see. It's a guy that can admit, where he might have had pitfalls, and like I don't want to discuss Roquan Smith too much on the podcast, moving up into this year. Obviously, we'll always be a huge fan of the guy, and was very happy to see where he was voted among his peers on the top 100.
Awesome.
Yeah, something about NFL players knowing other NFL players. That's why Justin Fields made it on that list as well, because NFL players know. But I really do think that, Poles was going to learn something from that. I think if there was ways that he could have handled that better, he would look back on it. Maybe, the trade ends up being the same, but there's ways you need to handle yourself with star players because it shows with the rest of the guys in the locker room and how they want to approach their contract negotiations, because they see a guy who has, in all sense, proved his contract and proved his worth. And he was getting, kind of hardballed, so that rubs off on other guys in the locker room, no matter how you want to feel about it.
Well, and it's almost like he had to do it in good faith now that you say that, right? And like, it's pretty easy to do that for a guy like Cole Kmet, and it's kind of small potatoes on the, a contract for a receiver or a corner is going to be a lot more, but you almost need to like say like, hey, this is the example. This is how you get extended, right? Like, this is what we want from you. So
I would say in the last 3 months, the most excitement I've had about this team in particular was seeing that Cole Kmet got extended. Like, dude, I was jumping for fucking joy. I was so damn happy. Yeah. Like, I cannot wait to see, because dude, Cole Kmet is starving, and like I cannot wait to see him get fed multiple times a game all fucking season, because like this guy needs to eat badly, and Justin Fields needs to feed him the football. I would also like to take like a full large piece of beef tenderloin, line everybody up against the wall who shit on Cole Kmet over the last few years, and just go down the line and smack every single one of them in the face, because fuck you, Cole Kmet's great. He's earned every single fucking dime, and he's going to be an absolute stud with us for a long time.
It's going to look like a very good contract too.
All he does is catch big plays, catch touchdowns, and hit fucking home runs. And that's what I love about Cole Kmet. And genuinely, like I said, I don't know if we need to consider hooking him up with a food shelter or something like that, because that man is always fucking starving and he constantly needs to eat.
Yeah, and I just think that contract's going to age really well. Like, he is still ascending. He is still so young. This is typically you've seen the stats where George Kittle had 3 receptions by this age, and Travis Kelce, was just drafted or whatever it was. But it takes these guys to, tight ends, a few years to really get into it. And he's been in different offenses now. Like, he's finally kind of in that prime age for a tight end. He's going to go fucking nuts. And this is going to look like a very good contract. Like, I'm glad it got done now, because if you waited till after this year, he might have been too expensive.
Yeah, dude, he would have easily priced himself out. And while he is a Chicago kid, you're gonna always, get that idea that he's gonna want to negotiate with the Bears. Like, it would have been a situation where he'd be crazy not to go test the market.
Yeah.
I think you nailed you nailed it on the head, Lucas. Sometimes it takes tight ends a little bit longer. Not every guy is going to be a Vernon Davis and pop off day one. George Kittle kind of popped off in year 2, but year 1 he was a promising young player. Travis Kelce, it genuinely did take him about 3 years to pop off, and Travis Kelce is the unquestioned best tight end in the fucking league right now. So he has Patrick Mahomes throwing him the football. I'm not ignorant to that, but still, there's no doubt that Travis Kelce can go on any offense and produce. And that's where I tried to preach that type of patience with a guy like Cole Kmet, because it's we saw flashes of it in year 1. We saw what he did at Notre Dame when he utilized correctly. Me and you, Lucas, both knew damn well that what Matt Nagy was selling was absolute horse shit. So it was impossible for us to really be able to fall off on the guy because we weren't even using him in the red zone. And that's where he made his he didn't make money at Notre Dame, I promise. But that's where he fucking, that's where he fucking served the plate. That's where he ate. That's where because nobody could buy him a meal because it was the NCAA, but that's where he ate, was in the end zone, because it was free meals over there. That was the meal plan. But I'm sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent.
That's all. Allegedly.
I just watched the Manziel fucking documentary yesterday, so the NCAA is very much on my mind right now.
That's incredible. He's such a fucking idiot. But no, I think he's gonna catch 10 touchdowns. That's a modest fucking estimate for him, in my opinion. If you really think about, I like Jimmy Graham, and I actually did not mind him as a signing at all. I know a lot of people were upset about it. That signing was quite possibly the worst thing for Cole Kmet's growth. That stunted his growth exponentially, because that year in 2020 was Jimmy Graham's first year. I think Cole Kmet had 1 red zone target the entire year. They didn't even try to get him the ball in the red zone. So that's why he had no touchdowns. And they really didn't try to get him going until Patriots game-ish last year, right? It took him 6-7 weeks to even start really being we got to fucking get this guy the ball. It was really when the Eberflus highlight the skill. We need to, we don't have much skill. We need to make sure to get the ball into the hands of the people that can actually do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I could credit Eberflus all day, because I genuinely think he has all the fucking keys to be just a great head coach. But even last year, it was to the point where it's Darnell Mooney and everyone else, we need to figure something out. We need Justin Fields to have somebody to throw the fucking football to, because it ain't working out with anyone else. I think St. Brown had a good week 1, maybe week 2 or something like that, if I'm remembering correctly, where he had a big play, and he was good for a big play every couple games. But you need more from that number 2 receiver, and you just were not getting it anywhere else. Velus Jones, it was a churn of a rookie year, and I am actually really excited to see that he's placed as the starting kick returner and punt returner, because if he can keep his hands on the football, I think he can genuinely be dynamite. I don't care how fucking old he is, he can return kicks. But I think you had to feed Cole Kmet at that point. You didn't have a choice. You had to at least see what you had in him. Cole had kind of popped off a little bit in that last year with Matt Nagy, because he kind of hit the same situation where it's okay, so it's Darnell Mooney and everybody else. Allen Robinson has fallen off a cliff. Justin needs to be able to throw the football to somebody. And naturally, a young quarterback, and I'll die on this hill, the best thing you can do for a young quarterback in his first season in the league is give him a tight end. Look at every quarterback that's won a Super Bowl in recent memory. They've had a damn good tight end being able to throw the football to, because that's your safety valve over the middle of the field. That's a guy who can jump over and body a linebacker. That's a guy who can get underneath the safety. It's just a good problem to have. And being able to see him really take off in the second half of last year, we finally got a real taste of what he can be. And I'm really excited for the campaign he can put together, and especially with the depth at the tight end position, double tight end sets. You're not going to be able to just completely focus on Cole Kmet, because I think Rob Tonyan is a legitimate receiving threat, and I think we can give Cole some plays off and run blocking, because we now have Mercedes Lewis, who is essentially a 6th offensive lineman out there. Because we did see quite a bit of Kmet in blocking situations.
That's what that tells you, is they want to utilize him more in the pass game. That's exactly what the Mercedes Lewis signing tells you.
Yeah, and I think it's dynamite, and Mercedes Lewis, you can look at the age all you want, but he knows Getsy's system. Luke Getsy is a guy who I've absolutely just pulverized in the past year. I think I'll end up giving him a lot more credit as the weeks go on. But I really do like the direction where the offense is going. I think Cole Kmet's built to play very good football. It's all going to be about where the offensive line kind of stands when it's all said and done, because Lucas, as we kind of alluded to before the show, they've been kind of getting the tires beaten off him. No shout to Jatire Carter, but it's been tough. It's been tough early on.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, so here's my thing with the offense. Like, we never heard really in like the last 5 years through the whole Nagy era, like the offense looks great in training camp. Like, we've never heard that. Like, the offense beat the defense today, and we did hear that quite a bit at the beginning of training camp. And now that the pads are on, not as much. I know that Nate Davis and Tevin Jenkins have been out. That's two huge fucking pieces of the puzzle, right? That you have two veterans essentially. I would consider Tevin Jenkins at veteran status in year 3, right? So you have two guys kind of helping out the younger guys, and then the old vet kind of putting it all together. So having those two guys be out, I want to make. Here's the thing, though, right? You got to build depth, and like Leatherwood, right? Should there be that big of a drop off? I don't know. How has he been performing? Not great, is what it doesn't sound like. And he went in pretty good. Lucas Patrick was a signing that everyone just absolutely blew their loads for. And they're talking about how, like, he was a solution. And the reality is we did make investments in the offensive line, and we made significant investments around Justin Fields. But with the way we tore things down, and we kind of said this going into the offseason at the end of last year, even, you're not going to be able to fucking turn this thing around. Like, you're not going to have an elite offensive line or an elite anything for a couple years now. Like, there's too many spots to fill. Darnell, even if you hit on all of your signings, right, and Cody Whitehair really plays better than he did last year, Braxton Jones takes that step forward. All it takes is one injury for you to kind of come back down to size, and now it's Lucas Patrickson or Alex Leatherwood or whoever it may be, right? So, it wasn't going to ever be a 1-year process, but I thought that Poles was going to find a lot more value in like late rounds, UDFA type guys, where you wouldn't see as much of a jump when guys go out, right? And I think that's been a big part of what's hindered them offensively in the offensive line in training camp, is having those two guys go out. And we don't know how big the injuries are, right? Like, even Claypool got banged up yesterday. We don't know if it's, hey, they just have a little fucking bruise, and we don't want to necessarily like further this, injury, or they'd be playing week 1 if it came down to it, right? Like, we have no idea because there's no actual injury reports coming out. So it's tough to really tell, right? Like, how bad these are and if it's going to hinder them. We won't really know for a few weeks still. So I'm just going to be optimistic, right? Like, I'm sure you want to touch on Claypool too, because he's a guy that we criticized a lot, the move itself, right? Maybe not the player as much, but the move itself. And like, he seems to be having a great training camp, and to see him come up hobbled yesterday is, it's tough. There's just been a lot of injuries the last 2 years in training camp. It's like, you hear that report come out with Flus, about how he got fined, and like, it's cool to try to instill that toughness, but like, is he doing too fucking much where these guys are getting hurt? Like, you can't go into the season banged up every fucking year.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something you definitely have to take a look at. I mean, it's very easy for us, like, all, pound our Eberfuel, pound our chests, and talk about how great it is that, Matt Eberflus is having these guys hit each other hard every single time. But like, yeah, I mean, injuries have to be something that we have to be a little cautious about. I want to see what Chase Claypool looks like in a full season with the Chicago Bears in Luke Getsy's offense. While me and you have been insanely critical of him in the past, there is that slight aura of like, he can potentially still be the guy that we saw flashes of in Pittsburgh. So like, it would be nice to see a healthy version of that. And I know this comment right here will just pop off a lot of people on Bears Twitter, but how much do we really know about why Claypool was on the PUP list in the first place? You know what I mean? Like, was there something lingering there? Obviously he got put on it and immediately taken off it, so it was just kind of one of those things. And obviously he's had a pretty good camp moving forward, but is that something that is potentially lingering? We don't know what totally happened there, so is this an injury where the Bears were kind of prepared for something like this to happen? Obviously, you never wish on injury, but it was like, okay, so if this happens, if he starts having injuries in the same particular spot, maybe we kind of slow him down a little bit. We don't know how cautious or what the plan is with Chase Claypool, because obviously we've seen in the past that, or even just last year, that this team will kind of stash guys a little bit if they get beaten up in practice, and kind of give them a breather and kind of let them kind of figure out their body and only come back at 100%. So Claypool's not fighting for a roster spot. You know what I mean? That's kind of the short and long of it. He's going to be here week 1 regardless. He could be having the worst camp in the world. He's still going to be there week 1, and he's still going to get a snap share because of what he's shown in the past and what we gave up to get him. So it's going to be something to monitor for sure. Hopefully it's nothing too serious. It's very promising to hear that Claypool is, in camp and just kind of getting feisty, trying to prove
he's been the best receiver, like, out of everyone, including DJ Moore, right? Like that's what the reports are saying, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and to that point though, I could sit here and talk about how good David Moore looked in Bears camp last year. You know what I mean? There were times where he looked like the best receiver on the field. So like it can be a little difficult to see where he's going to fit into the offense sometimes, especially with Mooney and DJ Moore. Are they going to play Mooney in the slot? Are they going to use Chase Claypool as a big slot guy, which would be wild? But I mean, we've seen crazier things. It's going to be something to monitor with Claypool, and I think any net positive we can get throughout the preseason with him heading into the season is going to be a good indicator of what we could potentially get out of him. And hopefully it's a productive wide receiver, a wide receiver even somewhat capable of the level that we traded away to get him.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why I was reserved on Young too, right? Like we already kind of took that project in. We don't need to do 2 of those. Those things start up.
And he's no doubt the project. Like there's zero doubt. I don't think there's anybody on this squad that's more of a project than Chase Claypool. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it
still stands, right? Like if he doesn't get extended, absolutely awful move. Sure, it doesn't look as bad because you were able to trade down and get a bunch of picks and get DJ Moore, and great. Yeah, whatever. Like it will never go down as a good trade if he doesn't get extended for like a substantial amount of time, right? Like even a 1-year deal would be like stupid we did this, right? So let's just hope he goes fucking nuts and warrants a good extension, right? Like let's hope that happens. But also, the Nate Davis, like it just sucks at this time not actually figuring out how bad injuries are, because like Nate Davis is I don't think he's really missed any time at all in his 4 years. So for him to be sitting out of practice seems kind of weird. You know what I mean? Like it seems like it could be significant, but maybe it's not. Maybe they're like, hey, we just paid you $14 million a year as a guard. You're getting paid as a top guard in the league. Like we're not going to let you fucking tweak anything before the season starts. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think if you hand Nate Davis the amount of money that we handed him, we kind of have an expectation of what he already is compared to what he can be. It was a little bit different with like the Lucas Patrick signing, where it's like, oh, this guy showed flashes in Green Bay and he knows the system. Like maybe he can pop off and be a starter. And now we know obviously that's not the case. I do want to make a point to say though, Lucas Patrick as a guy coming off the bench really doesn't bother me as much as being a guy that could potentially start multiple games. Like I don't want to see Lucas Patrick start one game this season. If there's an injury mid-game and he has to roll into either of the guard positions or play center for like, half the game and we get our starter back next week, I don't hate that at all. It just really sucks with the contract that he has to play that type of role, because I think that role is important. You know what I mean? You need those types of guys on the offensive line. You don't want them to ever start, but they're guys that can jump into multiple positions on the offensive line in a pinch, and I think that's a good thing to have. Like I said, his contract just kind of sucks. And with Alex Leatherwood, we were just talking about, Chase Claypool being a project. Like this guy, he just has never really shown that flash of ever being that guy. You know what I mean? He showed it maybe a little bit in college, but I keep hearing the discussion of him playing out of position, and he's better suited as a guard than he is a tackle, and he played at the wrong side. Like I need to see anything out of this guy in the preseason to be even somewhat confident about what we've getting moving forward, because I don't think he necessarily looked good at all last year. I don't think he looked good ever before that, besides Alabama. And he's a guy that, if we're holding back somebody like Doug Kramer, who I want to see a little bit more of, and we could possibly have Lucas Patrick be like the backup guard and have Kramer be the backup center. Maybe that's something I want to explore a little bit more if Kramer's having a good camp. I don't know. I haven't heard a ton about Doug Kramer yet, but like that's the type of guy who I felt like got injured last year in a tough spot because I thought he looked fairly promising. Not as a guy that's going to potentially be a superstar at center or anything, but a guy who can hold down the fort if he's asked, kind of similar in that Lucas Patrick role, because those are the types of guys you really want on your bench.
You do need quality ass depth in the O line. Like you need to be like 7 or 8 deep. I'm not going to say you need a replacement for everyone, but you need like 7 or 8 players that can start on the offensive line on your roster.
Yeah, no, and I do think that's really important. You know, you don't need superstars backing up these guys. You know, even like, and I'm really interested to see what the role is moving forward with Larry Borum, because it feels like he will be that backup tackle on both sides. But that's another guy I don't really want to see a ton of if I don't have to, because we've seen quite a bit from Larry. We've seen flashes of him being really good. We've seen he flat out lost his job last year when he was given every opportunity to win it and take it. And I think the drafting of Darnell Wright really signifies how bad Larry Borum played last year. I don't think there's any way around that. So it's going to be interesting to see how he is moving forward. That's the only thing that sucks about the fact that I haven't made it to training camp, because obviously when you look on Twitter and you see these guys covering the team, they're never going to be talking about the offensive linemen. And I always like seeing how these guys kind of come in, and it was nice to see it last year. But that's why I'm really excited for Saturday when we play the Titans. I really want to see what these offensive linemen look like. I think that's going to be the number one thing I'm going to be paying attention to. We know what Justin Fields, DJ Moore, and all them, any of the starters are going to be playing as far as skill positions. We kind of know what they are at this point, besides Claypool, but he's not going to play anyway. I'm really excited to see both the offensive and defensive line and see what they look like when we hit this game on Saturday.
Yeah, especially guys like Dexter, right? Some of these picks. I want to see Tyreek Stevenson too. Not that that's a lineman, but I would like to see some of these picks. I'd like to see Darnell Wright. I would assume he's going to get significant time in this first game. I heard he's been having some issues with false starts, which isn't a great sign, but from what I've heard, it's also been kind of what you want to expect. Like they're challenging him in training camp. He's taking his lumps, but he's also winning battles as well too, which is what you want to see from your right, a tackle that you're going to really expect to play on an island, right? Like not get much help and kind of be that guy to be the linchpin of your right side. So, in terms of guys I'm excited for, though, I would say probably the most excited, Tyler Scott, dude. I feel like we're hearing about him making plays like here and there, and I don't know how many opportunities he's getting in training camp, but I think he's going to get a substantial amount of time in the preseason. And I think he's going to work his way up that depth chart. I mean, you already see he's the 6th or 5th guy. So he's already made the team. Like he's going to be on the 53-man roster. And same with Roschon Johnson too, which is great, right? Like I'd like to see a lot of him. From what I'm being told, he's by far the most complete back we have in terms of pass catching, pass blocking, and then also rushing, not giving tells and things like that. So just excited to see what some of these young guys can do in general. And I'm just happy we're talking about fantasy and just like football's here. Like there's a football game going on right now. I shouldn't even be talking to your fat ass.
Well, hey, man, it's not the Bears, so I mean, you can only enjoy it so much. I scratched a lot of the itch with the Hall of Fame game, which was just fantastic with all the presentations.
And Dorian Thompson Robinson just pulling his meat out and swinging it helicopter style was an incredible thing to see, because I just fucking was gassing that guy up all off season. I feel like
I never realized I needed to see DeMarcus Ware sing the national anthem until I saw DeMarcus Ware sing the national anthem.
It wasn't good.
He wasn't. He got a lot of flack on Twitter, but honestly, dude, I think you do some singing lessons. I think that man has a second fucking long-term career right there.
I don't think it was that. Don't get me wrong. Is he a professional fucking level performer that's going to be at the Super Bowl? No, but for a guy that was going into the fucking Hall of Fame and they wanted to have him sing the national anthem, it wasn't bad at all.
It kind of reminded me of when Barstool had that I think it was that bowl game or whatever, and they didn't have anyone sing the anthem, so they just sent Big Cat out there to sing it. It was just kind of one of those situations where it felt like, shit, we forgot to hire somebody. Send DeMarcus Ware out there right now and let's see what he can do.
I would hope that didn't happen, but who knows, dude.
You never know,
There's
especially.
oversights in every industry. Trust me, there's oversights all the time.
Yeah, I mean, dude, especially in Canton, dude. Sometimes they flat out can't play that game because the turf is bad. So like, it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We definitely love it, but I mean, there can be ragtag operations happening every once in a while. I do like that you brought up Tyler Scott. We are running a little bit long, so this kind of be my final point. But I do like the idea of him potentially being able to play all three receiver positions in the offense. I think he shows a lot of potential. That was one of those guys that really fell under the radar in the draft. I think everybody gets excited about everybody that the Bears draft every single year, and they find ways to hype themselves up about it. But I feel like with Tyler Scott, there's kind of some meat and potatoes right there. I have seen people give him kind of the Johnny Knox treatment that he could potentially be like our next version of that. That's bold. That is very bold. That is a tall glass of water to fucking be able to
I
drink.
think people kind of underestimate how good Johnny Knox was and how good he would have been. Like, he was still young and ascending, right? Like, he would have been a very, very, very good fucking player. And he was actually perfect for a guy like Cutler.
Well, and people forget that Johnny Knox put on like 15 pounds of muscle in that last training camp. Like he had actively he understood what he needed to do to become an every down wide receiver, and he was actively working towards that without losing any of his athleticism, by the way. He was a guy that like early on in his career, we all bitched about his route running, and even that improved every single year. So like while I appreciate seeing Johnny Knox on my Twitter timeline, like let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's let Tyler Scott be Tyler Scott, and let's see what he can do, because I think he's an exciting young prospect. And while a guy like Dante Pettis was a lot of fun to watch last year at certain points in the season, like I think you really
without it.
I think you want to pay attention to guys like Tyler Scott and give those guys a chance over a career journeyman and Dante Pettis.
I'm all good. I'm all good with ESPN Dante Pettis. Just give me the young guys. They're not. Listen, if we get to the point where our wide receiver room is so battered that we're depending on Dante Pettis and ESB again, like we could sign guys like that off the street, no problem, in week 12. And we don't want to be in that position. So.
Take a chance. Take a chance on the high upside guys over the guys that we like already know.
I don't. I'd be okay with. They have another kid. Crushank made an insane catch, and there was one other kid that isn't there a UDFA that's on the depth chart? At wide receiver.
Is it Darius Fountain?
Fountain, yeah, that kid's been making plays. So I would like to see him get pushed. You know what I mean? Fuck it, bring in the UDFA. We know what those two guys are, and they're not terrible players. And honestly, if it was just one of them, I'd be like, okay, that's fine, whatever. He's just that guy that's our wide receiver 4. But like, bring in fucking Fountain, bring in Crushank, all these other fucking guys, dude. I don't want to see the journeyman. Like we don't need any at this point. We don't have any journeymen on the team other than those two guys. Maybe I would like to consider Yannick more of a mercenary. But you know what I mean? It's like all young, homebred talent for the most part. Like, let's just fucking let's take that final push. Like, ESB and Dante Pettis are not going to be the reason we make or don't make the playoffs.
No. And if they are, we have much bigger issues at hand.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it was pretty good points. Two other guys I do want to see quite a bit of, and he touched on it really quick. Gervin Dexter, I want to see what he can do. All reports are that he's been having a good camp, but there are things he needs to clean up. Zach Pickens, there's been a lot of discussion about him not being able to, kind of getting clapped in one-on-one drills. So I kind of want to see what he does against maybe a defender that doesn't quite know him. You know what I mean? So it's going to be that's something where like those two guys physically, there's such a high upside there, but we need to be able to see it on the field. I think the trenches, that's going to be the key for week 1 of the preseason here for me personally.
Yeah. From what I've heard, Dexter's still just slow off the snap, but he's a fucking moose in there. Like, you're not moving him. You know what I mean? I've heard he's been very good, but still just slow off the snap. Like, which I thought they were going to be able to work out pretty quick, but we'll see.
I think it'll be a bit of a process, because he has been playing in that system with Florida for a few years now, where he was just basically, and he's even talked about that candidly in the media about how he was used in that way where he didn't necessarily agree with it, but he was by far the most talented defender on the defensive line, and they needed someone to kind of play that role because that was the most important role of their defense. So credit to him for being able to kind of step up and take that role. But it's hard to get out of that tendency when you've basically built that for the last few years. But ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have this week for the Barely There podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to follow both of us on Twitter. You can follow me at that pod guy Duke. You can follow Lucas at Lucas Perfetti 46, as well as the podcast at Barely There Pod. Till next time, this has been Duke Coughlin, joined by Lucas Perfetti. We will be back next week with another exciting episode covering your Chicago Bears. Drink your Eber Fuel and say your prayers. Bear down.
Bear down.